Hello, everyone, and welcome. Let's get right into it. Our main character today is Autumn, a talented and independent graphic designer. This is the story of her struggle when the man she financially and emotionally supported, her husband Grayson, publicly humiliates her in front of his new, elite business circle. It's a moment that triggers the unraveling of a betrayal far deeper than she could have ever imagined. If you're ready to follow her journey, please don't forget to subscribe and support this channel. The silence was a physical weight, pressing down on the table, suffocating the clinking of distant silverware. It was the kind of silence that only follows a moment of profound public cruelty. Autumn Reeves Caldwell sat at the far end of the polished mahogany table, a deliberate placement. She was a satellite, just outside the warm gravitational pull of the conversation, close enough to be seen but too far to participate. This was the Ashford Society, an exclusive Manhattan club where the annual dues alone eclipsed her freelance income for an entire year. The air smelled of old leather, expensive whiskey, and the quiet, unassailable confidence of generational wealth. This was Grayson's world now. It had never been and would never be hers. She kept her expression neutral, a practiced mask she had perfected over the last year. Her gaze was fixed somewhere just past her husband's shoulder, not looking at him, but not quite looking away. Grayson was holding court, his laugh, a new, booming sound he developed along with his corner office, echoing slightly. "I don't want you asking them for help." He had said it loudly. He had meant for it to be heard. Meant for Marcus Brennan, his senior partner, to hear it. Meant for Devin Whitaker, a potential investor, to hear it. Meant for Victoria, Marcus's wife, to hear it. It was Victoria who had caused this, in her blissfully ignorant way. "Oh, Autumn," she'd chirped, leaning past Devin. "You simply must come with Grayson to the Partners Summit in the Hamptons this fall. All the spouses will be there. It's divine." An innocent invitation. A landmine. Grayson's smile hadn't faltered, but it had calcified. He'd turned, not to Autumn, but to the table at large, as if she were a hypothetical problem rather than the woman sitting 10 feet away. He'd laughed that networking laugh. "You really think I'd ever let you meet my rich business friends?" He'd said, the words casual, brutal. Then, leaning in as if sharing a corporate strategy, "I don't want you asking them for help." The server approaching with the main course executed a flawless, silent retreat, sensing the invisible blast radius. Marcus Brennan suddenly found the abstract painting on the far wall utterly fascinating. Devin Whitaker began studying the legs of his wine glass as if searching for a serial number. Victoria's face went pale, her bright smile collapsing into a small O of horror. They were embarrassed. Not for him, Autumn realized with a cold sickness. They were embarrassed by her. Autumn's hands were clasped in her lap, her knuckles white. She was wearing the simple black dress from Nordstrom Rack. The one she'd bought 2 years ago, before Grayson's venture capital firm had taken off, back when they were still a team. He had specifically asked her to wear it tonight. She'd thought it was a strange request, maybe even nostalgic. Now, sitting at the table, she understood. He hadn't asked her to wear it. He had costumed her. He had dressed her for the part of the dowdy, unimpressive wife. The before picture. Her mind flashed back, a quick, painful slideshow. 4 years ago, Grayson, his second startup in flames, moving into a Tribeca apartment with 2 suitcases and a mountain of debt. Grayson, sitting at her kitchen counter while she paid for their groceries, their rent, their utilities from her graphic design business. Her, designing his pitch decks, coaching him for meetings, believing in him when no one else, including himself, did. She had been his partner, his safety net, his biggest cheerleader. Now she was a liability. A potential embarrassment who might use a cocktail hour to ask for help. "Well," Victoria stammered, trying desperately to stitch the evening back together, "the summit is still months away. Plenty of time to decide." She was giving him an out, a chance to backtrack, to say he was joking. Grayson didn't take it. He waved a dismissive hand. "Autumn has her own projects to focus on. She stays busy with her little design work." He said little design work with an emphasis that made it sound like a hobby, like watercolors or knitting. Not the business that had kept them afloat for 18 months. Not the career she had built from scratch, the career that had clients who valued her, the career that had been the foundation of their life before it became his life. She found her voice, though it came out thin and tight. "I actually specialize in branding and marketing strategy for nonprofits," she said, directing the words at Victoria, refusing to look at her husband. Devin glanced up, polite interest warring with his discomfort. "That's interesting." Very charitable of you. Charitable. The word hung in the air, another small, sharp dart. As if her work was volunteer service. As if helping a women's shelter secure funding or rebranding a community health clinic was somehow less valuable, less real, than moving numbers around on a screen. Marcus cleared his throat, a sound like gravel dropping on velvet. Speaking of acquisitions, Grayson, he boomed, desperate to change the subject. Did I tell you what the tech startup in Austin countered with? Grayson engaged immediately. The transformation was instant and total. The cold, dismissive man vanished, replaced by the charismatic, brilliant partner his colleagues knew. He leaned forward, his voice animated, gesturing with his fork as he dove into shop talk. The chill that had frozen the table thawed instantly. Laughter returned. The conversation flowed. Autumn was left behind, an iceberg calved from a glacier, drifting alone in the sudden warmth. She watched him perform, this stranger, who looked like her husband. He was charming. He was engaged. He was successful. He was everything she had always known he could be. And he was a man she didn't recognize at all. She picked up her fork and pushed a piece of asparagus around her plate, the food tasteless, the humiliation a burning coal in her stomach. She had supported him through his failures. And now that he was a success, she had discovered her reward, to be treated like the help. She remained silent for the rest of the dinner, a ghost at the feast, counting the minutes until she could go home. Home to her apartment. The one he had slowly, methodically, taken over, replacing her comfortable, worn furniture with his cold, expensive aesthetic. The home that, like her husband, no longer felt like her own. The ride home was a vacuum. Grayson sat beside her, the stiff wool of his overcoat a barrier between them, his face illuminated by the cold blue light of his phone. He was scrolling, tapping, responding to emails or messages from the very colleagues who had just witnessed her degradation. He was already back in his world, the dinner incident a minor piece of turbulence, already forgotten. Autumn stared out the window, the familiar lights of the West Side highway blurring into streaks of gold and red. The city felt alien tonight, a place she merely existed in, not a place she belonged. The silence in the cab was louder than the dinner had been. It was an active, suffocating thing, filled with everything Grayson wasn't saying. I'm not sorry. You deserved it. You are not important. When the cab pulled up to their building in Tribeca, her building, she reminded herself, a small, bitter thought, Grayson paid without a word and strode into the lobby ahead of her. He didn't hold the door. She entered the apartment, and the feeling of displacement intensified. The foyer was dark, lit only by a single, recessed light that Grayson had installed, one that highlighted an abstract painting he bought at auction. A piece that looked, to Autumn, like an expensive, angry accident. Her vintage concert posters, colorful and full of memories, were long gone, relegated to a storage unit, deemed juvenile and unprofessional. The living room was a museum of his success. Her comfortable, overstuffed reading chair, the one she'd found at an estate sale and loved deeply, had been replaced by a sculptural piece of black leather and chrome that was impossible to relax in. Her bookshelves, once a chaotic, beloved mix of novels and art books, were now organized by spine color, a rainbow effect that photographed well for the rare occasions he entertained, but made it impossible to find anything. This wasn't a home. It was a showroom. A stage set for the life of Grayson Caldwell, and she was just a piece of set dressing he was growing tired of. He was already in the hallway, loosening his tie. I have an early meeting, he called over his shoulder, his voice muffled. Don't wait up. He didn't turn around. He didn't ask if she was okay. He didn't apologize. He simply retreated into the master bedroom, the one he had also redesigned in shades of stark gray and white, and closed the door. The soft click of the latch felt like a final punctuation mark on the evening. Autumn stood alone in the center of the living room, her coat still on. The black dress from Nordstrom Rack felt cheap and tight against her skin. She had supported this man. When his second startup had collapsed, taking all his savings with it, she had held him while he wept in this very apartment. She had paid the rent. She had covered his expenses. She had told him, night after night, that he was brilliant and that his time would come. And he had let her. He had taken her support, taken her money, taken her apartment, and used it all as a launch pad. Now that he had achieved orbit, he was cutting the booster stage loose, leaving her to burn up on re-entry. The humiliation from dinner wasn't an isolated event. It was a symptom of a much deeper rot. He wasn't just careless. He was cruel. She sank onto the angular, unyielding sofa, the cold leather chilling her through the thin fabric of her dress. She felt a profound, hollow ache. He had made her small. And the worst part, the part that twisted in her stomach, was that she had let him. Her phone vibrated on the coffee table, a sharp, buzzing sound in the quiet room. She glanced at it, expecting, perhaps, a belated, cowardly text apology from Grayson. It was not from Grayson. The message was from a number she recognized, but didn't have saved. Connor Matthews. Grayson's best friend since college. The best man at their wedding. Of all Grayson's new, polished friends, Connor was the only one who felt real, the only one who ever asked about her design work with genuine interest. Her heart began to beat a little faster. The message was brief, ominous. Are you awake? I need to tell you something important. Can I call? A chill, entirely different from the apartment's cold aesthetic, crept up her spine. It was almost midnight. This was not a social call. Her fingers trembled slightly as she typed back a single-word reply. Yes. She changed it. I'm awake. Call me. The phone rang almost instantly. She pressed accept and held it to her ear. She could hear the faint noise of a bar in the background, music, voices, before it muffled, as if he had stepped outside. Autumn, he said. His voice was heavy, strained. God, Autumn. I'm so sorry about tonight. You heard, she whispered, her throat tight. Marcus's assistant was there. She texted me what happened. What he said to you. It's unforgivable. Autumn closed her eyes, a fresh wave of humiliation washing over her. Of course. The story was already circulating. The gossip network of his elite world. I appreciate you calling, Connor, but that's not why I'm calling, he cut in, his voice urgent. Not really. Autumn, I can't keep quiet anymore. After hearing what he did tonight, I can't be complicit. Complicit in what? A knot of dread tightened in her stomach. Connor, you're scaring me. There was a long pause, filled only with the distant sound of city traffic through his phone. He took a deep, shuddering breath. He's been having an affair. The words didn't compute. They were just sounds. She stared at the expensive, meaningless painting on her wall. What? He's been seeing someone, Connor said, the words coming faster now, as if a dam had broken. Her name is Rebecca Thornton. She's a junior analyst at his firm. It's been going on for at least 8 months. Maybe longer. 8 months. The room tilted. The air left her lungs. 8 months. She tried to do the math. 8 months ago, she was helping Grayson prep for the investor presentation that had landed him his partnership. 8 months ago, she had maxed out one of her own business credit cards to buy him the new suits he'd needed to look the part. How do you know? Her voice was a dry rasp. I saw them, Connor said, his voice flat with self-loathing. 3 months ago, at a restaurant in Brooklyn. They didn't see me. He was holding her hand across the table, laughing, touching her arm. He sounded sick. I confronted him the next day. He begged me not to tell you. Swore it was a mistake, that he was ending it, that he loved you and didn't want to lose you. Autumn gripped the edge of the glass coffee table, her knuckles pressing into the sharp edge. The pain was a distant, dull throb. I wanted to believe him, Connor continued, his voice cracking with an anger she realized wasn't directed at her. He's my best friend. I told myself he'd fix it. But he didn't, Autumn. He's still seeing her. He's still lying to you. And tonight, after he humiliated you like that in front of everyone, I realized he's not the man I thought he was. And I've been helping him hurt you by staying silent. 8 months. The word echoed in the empty showroom of her apartment. All the late nights he'd claimed were meetings. The weekend retreats he'd gone on alone. The sudden, intense focus on his fitness. The new, expensive cologne. It wasn't for her. None of it had been for her. The humiliation from dinner was a shallow cut. This was a mortal wound. The man she had built her life around, the man she had saved, had been systematically betraying her while she was busy cheering his success. The cold, sterile apartment suddenly made a new, terrible kind of sense. It wasn't just that he was replacing her things. He was replacing her. Autumn's mind was a maelstrom, struggling to process the impact of the first revelation, the affair, the 8 months, Rebecca. It was a betrayal so total it felt surreal, like a story happening to someone else. She was still reeling from that, her hand gripping the phone so tightly her fingers ached, when Connor's voice, heavy with a new kind of dread, pulled her deeper into the nightmare. Autumn, he said, and the hesitation in his tone was worse than the words that had come before. There's more. And, God, this part is honestly worse. Worse? What could be worse than a year of lies? What could be worse than finding out the life she thought she was building was a facade, that the man she had supported was sharing his success, his time, and his body with another woman? She couldn't form the question. She just waited, a silent, hollow vessel, as the city traffic hummed a distant, indifferent soundtrack to the implosion of her world. Grayson's been telling people in his professional circle, Autumn, Marcus, Devon, all of them, that you're financially dependent on him. The words hung in the sterile air of the living room. Financially dependent. He's been telling them that your design business is a hobby, Connor continued, his voice laced with disgust, as if the words themselves tasted foul. Something cute you do to stay busy, but not a real career. He's been painting this picture of himself as the successful, self-made man who is generously supporting a wife who doesn't contribute. A sharp, cold laugh, devoid of humor, escaped Autumn's lips. It was a sound she didn't recognize. Dependent? Her dependent? The woman who had paid the rent on this very apartment for 3 years? The woman who had covered their groceries, their utilities, their everything, while he was between failures, nursing his bruised ego and building his next vision? She thought of the checks she had written, the clients she had juggled at all hours, the nights she had stayed up, bleary-eyed, finishing a project for a deadline, while he slept, resting for his important meetings that her income was allowing him to take. He's erased you, Connor said quietly, as if finally understanding the scope of it himself. He's erased your contribution. In his version of the story, he's the hero who moved in and saved you, not the other way around. The blood drained from her face, leaving her skin cold and clammy. This was worse. This was so much worse. The affair was a betrayal of their vows, a wound to her heart. This was a betrayal of her identity. It was a theft. He was stealing her past, her work, herself, and rewriting history to fuel his own fragile ego. He tells people, Connor's voice was relentless now, a surgeon cutting out a tumor, that you're an embarrassment. That he can't bring you to important events because you lack sophistication. That you're from a different world and just don't understand the circles he moves in now. Suddenly, the dinner, the black dress, the public humiliation. It wasn't a drunken mistake. It wasn't a spontaneous moment of cruelty. It was strategic. Autumn's breath hitched. Her mind, sharp and analytical even through the pain, began connecting the dots with horrifying speed. Victoria's innocent invitation to the Hampton summit, it had been a threat. It had threatened the entire, fragile narrative Grayson had built. Tonight, Connor said, his voice dropping, when Victoria suggested you attend the summit, he panicked. That's what that was. He panicked. Because if you're there, if you're actually meeting his colleagues, talking to people, they might realize you're not the dependent, unsophisticated woman he's been describing. They might discover that you're smart and successful in your own right, and that you supported him when he had nothing. The whole story would fall apart. Grayson hadn't been lashing out in anger. He had been reinforcing the narrative. He had needed to put her in her place, to publicly label her as a desperate, grasping liability, to remind Marcus and Devon and Victoria exactly who she was in his story. He had dressed her in the Nordstrom rack dress not as an act of nostalgia, but as a costume to prove his point. See? See how simple she is? See how she doesn't belong? See why I have to keep her hidden? He hadn't just humiliated her. He had been performing a calculated act of reputation management. The coldness in her stomach solidified into something hard and heavy. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was a glacial rage. A pure, clarifying anger that burned away the shock and the pain. He hadn't just cheated. He had plotted. He had systematically, deliberately, and maliciously assassinated her character to his entire world, all to make himself look more impressive. He had taken her support, her loyalty, and her love, and twisted it into a story where she was the anchor holding him back. Autumn, are you still there? Connor's voice was tentative, worried. Why didn't you tell me sooner, Connor? She asked. The question was quiet, devoid of accusation. It was a simple request for data. He let out a long, heavy sigh. Because he's been my best friend since we were 19. Because I kept thinking he'd fix it. I kept telling him he had to end it, that he had to tell you the truth. He swore he would. I didn't want to be the one to destroy your marriage if there was a chance he'd do the right thing. He paused. But tonight, what he did to you tonight, that wasn't a mistake. That was a choice. And it showed me he's never going to fix this. He's just going to keep lying and keep hurting you and keep rewriting history. I couldn't be a part of that anymore. You deserve to know the truth. Thank you for telling me, Autumn said, and the voice that came out was not her own. It was someone else's. It was a woman who was not grieving, not crying, not breaking. It was a woman who was calculating. I know this wasn't easy. I'm so sorry, Autumn. For what it's worth, anyone who actually knows you knows the truth. All his colleagues, they only know the version he sold them. After they hung up, she didn't move. She sat in the darkness of the living room, surrounded by the furniture he had chosen, in the apartment he had stolen from her, and felt the last 3 years of her life reform into a new, hideous shape. Every late night he'd worked, every networking dinner she wasn't invited to, every subtle criticism of her clothes, her friends, her work. It was all part of the same campaign. A campaign to erase Autumn Reeves Caldwell, the capable, successful designer, and replace her with Grayson's dependent wife, a pathetic creature who should be grateful for whatever scraps of a life he threw her. He had underestimated her. He had seen her support as weakness. He had seen her loyalty as naivete. He had believed his own lies, believed she was the simple, charitable, unsophisticated woman he described to his friends. He had forgotten who she was. He had forgotten that she was the one who had built a life from nothing. He had forgotten that she was the one who had saved him. And he had forgotten, in his blinding arrogance, that this apartment, this entire stage set for his new life, was still, legally, in her name. A slow, cold smile touched her lips in the darkness. He thought she was a liability. He thought she was an embarrassment. He was about to find out just how wrong he was. The hours between midnight and dawn are a unique kind of hell, a time when every fear and failure feels magnified. For Autumn, they were a crucible. Sleep was an impossibility. The grief and shock that had briefly paralyzed her after Connor's call were gone, burned away by the pure, high-octane fuel of his final revelation. He's erased you. He's telling them you're dependent. An embarrassment. It wasn't just a betrayal of their marriage. It was a betrayal of their entire history. A hostile takeover of her life. At 4:17 a.m., she was not lying in bed. She was at the kitchen counter, his sterile, white quartz counter, with her laptop, her mind racing with a clarity she hadn't felt in years. The fog of trying to be Grayson's wife had lifted, revealing the sharp, strategic mind of Autumn Reeves Caldwell, the woman who had built a business from nothing. She made a list, not of her sorrows, but of his assets and liabilities, his lies, his colleagues, his vulnerabilities, and her one, singular, overlooked advantage. He had profoundly, fatally, underestimated her. At 7 a.m., she made the call. It rang twice before her sister answered, her voice thick with sleep. Autumn? What's wrong? It's 7 on a Saturday. Everything, Autumn said, and her voice was a low, steady rasp she barely recognized. Grayson. It's all lies. I need you. I need you both. Jade, her older sister by 3 years, was a family law attorney in Brooklyn. She was pragmatic, fierce, and had never, not once, trusted Grayson. We're on our way, Jade said, all traces of sleep gone. Simone is with me. We'll be there in 40. Simone, Jade's partner, was a digital forensics expert for a corporate security firm. She found things people thought they had deleted. She found things people didn't even know they had lost. By 8:15 a.m., the showroom apartment had been converted into a digital war room. Jade was at the kitchen counter with her own laptop, a legal pad already filling with notes. Simone had plugged a formidable-looking external drive into her machine and was sipping the coffee Autumn had made. Autumn delivered the briefing. She was calm, dispassionate. She laid out the facts as if presenting a case study. The public humiliation at the Ashford Society. The midnight call from Connor Matthews. The confirmed 8-month affair with Rebecca Thornton, analyst. The systematic campaign of lies. Her as the dependent, the hobbyist, the embarrassment. Jade listened, her expression growing harder with each detail. That narcissistic bastard, she said, not as an insult, but as a calm diagnosis. Okay, he's built a narrative. Now we dismantle it. Simone? Simone looked up from her screen, her focus total. Walk me through your digital life, Autumn, she said, her voice quiet, professional. Shared email accounts? Cloud storage? Any devices you both use? Autumn's mind ticked through the list. We keep our finances separate, thank God. He has his accounts, I have mine. No shared email. But wait. A memory surfaced. A small, insignificant moment from about a year ago. Grayson, frustrated with his own disorganization, handing her his laptop. The cloud storage, Autumn said, her voice barely a whisper as the implication hit her. We have a shared cloud storage account. Jade looked up from her pad. He asked me to set it up. Autumn continued, the naivete of it stinging her like acid. He said he needed help organizing his business files and personal documents, keeping everything backed up. He said he trusted me with it. Jade and Simone exchanged a single, stunned look. It was the kind of look that said, no one is this arrogant. No one is this stupid. He had asked the woman he was betraying, the woman he was systematically erasing, to be his digital archivist. Show me, Simone said, her fingers already flying. Autumn logged in. The main directory was exactly as she remembered it. Clean, professional folders. Investment reports. Client presentations. Market analysis. Conference materials. Simone took control of the laptop, her movements fast and sure. People who hide things, she murmured, almost never hide them well. They bury them under layers of legitimate-looking clutter, assuming no one will ever dig deep enough. She clicked. Conference materials. Inside that, Hamptons_2024. Inside that, keynotes. And inside that, a single, misplaced folder labeled simply, personal. Simone paused, her cursor hovering. She looked at Autumn. Are you ready? Autumn nodded. Show me everything. Simone clicked. It was not a folder. It was an archive. A meticulous, curated confession of his entire double life. Hundreds of files. The photos hit first. Grayson and Rebecca on a yacht, his arm around her bare waist, both of them laughing into the sun. Grayson and Rebecca at a rooftop bar, the Manhattan skyline glittering behind them, their faces close. Grayson and Rebecca in a hotel room, rumpled sheets, a bottle of champagne. Rebecca wearing one of his dress shirts. Weekend trips to places Grayson had claimed were solo business retreats. Each image was a small detonation, but the anger held the grief at bay. This wasn't a mistake. This was a life. There's more, Simone said, her voice grim. She opened another folder. Screenshots. Intimate conversations. Texts between him and Rebecca, planning their trysts, mocking their colleagues. And then a screenshot about Autumn. Rebecca had texted, "Will your roommate be a problem for the Miami trip?" Roommate. Autumn felt the air leave her lungs. In her own apartment, the one she had paid for, the one he had moved into, she had been demoted to roommate. That legal-grade son of a bitch, Jade whispered, her pen scratching furiously on her pad. And this, Simone said, her voice cold, is the kill shot. She opened the last folder. Expenses. It was a trove of receipts. Jewelry purchases from boutiques Autumn had never heard of. Flower deliveries to an address in the West Village, Rebecca's, presumably. Hotel stays. Expensive dinners. All meticulously scanned and saved. He's an idiot, Simone stated flatly. He's documenting his own betrayal. He's arrogant, Jade corrected, her eyes gleaming with a lawyer's predatory light. He didn't think you'd ever look. He didn't think you were capable of looking. Simone was already downloading everything, copying the entire personal folder to her encrypted drive. We need to back this up in multiple locations, she said. Physical drive, our own cloud. Autumn, this is your evidence. This proves the affair, it proves the timeline, it proves he's been lying to everyone. While Simone secured the digital arsenal, Jade was typing furiously into her own laptop, accessing public records. Autumn, Jade said, her voice suddenly sharp, cutting through the haze of betrayal. The apartment. When did you buy it? I didn't buy it, it's a rental. I signed the lease. God, 5 years ago. Before I even met him. Jade's typing stopped. She looked up from her screen, and for the first time that morning, she smiled. It was a terrifying, triumphant expression. I just pulled the building's records, Jade said slowly. The lease. It's solely in your name. Autumn blinked, not understanding. What do you mean? I mean, Jade said, leaning forward, that he moved into your apartment 3 years ago. And despite all his new money, despite all the thousands he spent on his ugly furniture and his gray paint, he never, ever got his name added to the legal documents. Simone stopped downloading and looked up. Jade's smile widened. Legally speaking, Autumn? He's not a tenant. He's not a co-owner. He's a guest. An unfaithful, expensive, monumentally stupid guest who has just overstayed his welcome. The 3 words hung in the quiet apartment, more powerful than the hundreds of photographs, more damning than the receipts, more potent than the intimate, lying texts.
He's a guest.
It was a legal fact, a cold, hard, beautiful piece of data. And for Autumn, it was the key that unlocked her own prison. She looked around the living room, at the furniture he had chosen, at the walls he had painted his preferred shade of sterile gray, at the art he had selected. For 3 years, she had felt her own identity being painted over, chipped away, and replaced. She had felt like an intruder in her own home, a tolerated, slightly embarrassing relic of his before life. She had subconsciously started acting like a guest herself, careful not to leave a glass on the wrong surface, tidying up obsessively, making herself small to fit into the grand, cold vision he was building. She realized now, with a clarity that was almost dizzying, that the reverse had been true all along. He was the guest. A guest who had moved in, criticized the decor, thrown out the host's beloved belongings, and then begun charging his own extravagant expenses to her emotional bank account. The man who had stood in that exclusive dining room and publicly branded her as a dependent, a charity case, a person who might ask for help, had been living rent-free in her apartment for 36 months. The man who had built an entire narrative for his colleagues about his unsophisticated wife had not possessed the basic sophistication to secure his own legal right to the multi-million-dollar apartment he was showing off as his own. The irony was so profound it was almost comical. He had erased her from his story, but he had forgotten to erase her name from the lease. He's a guest, Autumn repeated, and this time, the words came out with a smile. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a woman who had just been handed a loaded gun after being told she had no weapons. She turned to her sister. The shock, the grief, the humiliation of the past 12 hours evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp, singular focus. The emotional, wounded wife was gone. The graphic designer, the strategist, the business owner, was back in control. So, Jade, Autumn said, her voice perfectly level. As my attorney, what's the legal move? Jade's expression was all business, but her eyes were alight with a predatory gleam. The move is beautifully simple, she said, closing her laptop. He is not a tenant. He has no lease. He has established no legal residency that supersedes your primary ownership of the lease. You have the right to revoke his hospitality at any time. Revoke his hospitality, Autumn savored the phrase. We give him notice to vacate, Jade continued. Normally, I'd say 30 days to be generous. But given his egregious moral and ethical breaches, I'd say 48 hours is more than reasonable. 48 hours, Autumn mused. It seemed too fast. It seemed perfectly, terrifyingly possible. Simone, Jade said, you have the full data package? Copied, encrypted, and backed up in 3 separate locations, Simone confirmed, unplugging her drive. It's an airtight archive of infidelity and, I suspect, quite a bit of misuse of company funds, if these hotel receipts are any indication. Good, Autumn said. She looked at the two of them, her sister and her partner, an unshakable team. I can't thank you both enough. We're not done yet, Jade said. He's going to fight. He's going to manipulate and gaslight and try to turn this back on you. You can't do this over the phone, and you absolutely cannot do it here. Not alone. I know, Autumn said. She already knew. She would not have this conversation in his showroom. She would have it on her terms. Just then, her phone buzzed on the counter. It was Grayson. The timing was so perfect, so cosmically arrogant. She almost laughed. It was a text. Staying at Marcus's place tonight. Early meeting tomorrow. Don't wait up. No apology for dinner. No, are you okay? No acknowledgement of his cruelty. Just a logistical update, as if he were informing his assistant. He was still performing, still playing the part of the important, busy man, and he assumed, without a shadow of a doubt, that she was at home, waiting up. She showed the text to Jade, who just shook her head slowly. The arrogance, she whispered. It's breathtaking. Autumn picked up her phone. She ignored Grayson's text. She opened a new, clean message to him. Her fingers were perfectly steady. She thought for a moment, choosing a location. It had to be public. It had to be neutral. And it had to be symbolic. She knew the place. She typed, "We need to talk. Café Renoir. 4 p.m. tomorrow." She hit send. The blue delivered, receipt popped up almost instantly. Café Renoir? Jade asked, raising an eyebrow. It's where we had our first date, Autumn said, slipping the phone into her back pocket. The photos on Simone's drive, the name on the lease, and Grayson's arrogant text had all clicked into place. The path forward was clear. He started this lie 4 years ago in that cafe, telling me how different he was, how much he valued partnership. She looked up, her eyes clear and cold. It just feels right that I ended in the same place. Café Renoir was exactly as she remembered it. The small, bell-like chime from the door was the same. The air still smelled of dark roast coffee and old books. Mismatched wooden tables were crowded into the small space, and local, vibrant, chaotic art hung on the exposed brick walls. It was a place of warmth, of authenticity, of personality. It was, Autumn thought, everything her apartment had ceased to be. It was the place where she had met Grayson Caldwell for their first date, 4 years ago. She remembered him sitting at the very table she was now claiming, the small two-top in the corner by the window.
He had seemed so different then.
Eager, a little nervous, full of big ideas but lacking the resources to execute them. He had listened to her, really listened, asking sharp, insightful questions about her design process. He had been charmed by her independence, her established career. Or so she had believed. She arrived at 3:45 p.m., a full 15 minutes early. Not out of eagerness, but out of strategy. She wanted to own the space. She wanted to be seated, settled, and in control when he arrived. She ordered a black coffee she had no intention of drinking and placed her phone face down on the scarred wooden table. She was not nervous. The woman who had sat frozen in humiliation at the Ashford Society was gone. In her place was a CEO about to liquidate a toxic asset. At 4:23 p.m., he finally walked in. 23 minutes late. It was a deliberate, predictable power play. A classic Grayson maneuver designed to make her wait, to establish that his time was more valuable than hers. He scanned the crowded cafe, his expression a mask of bored irritation, as if this place was beneath him. He was wearing the navy blue, impeccably tailored suit. Autumn's stomach tightened, not with nostalgia, but with a fresh spike of cold anger. It was the suit she had helped him pick out, the one she'd encouraged him to splurge on for his very first major investor pitch 3 years ago. A meeting he'd been terrified to take. She had coached him for it in their living room, running mock Q&As until 2 a.m. He was wearing her support like armor, coming to this meeting to put her back in her place. He spotted her and his expression didn't soften. He approached the table with the confident, brisk stride of a man about to handle a difficult but necessary task. He slid into the chair opposite her, not even bothering to take off his suit jacket. "Look," he started, his voice low and patronizing, the one he used when he felt she was being emotional. He didn't apologize. He didn't ask how she was. He launched directly into his prepared script.
About last night.
"I had too much to drink. You know I say stupid things when I'm drinking. Victoria knows it, Marcus knows it. Nobody took it seriously, Autumn. You're making this into something much, much bigger than it needs to be." He was gaslighting her. He was rewriting the event right in front of her, minimizing his cruelty as a drunken gaffe and recasting her as the hysterical, oversensitive wife. This was his strategy. Deny, diminish, deflect. Autumn let the silence stretch. She watched him, her gaze level. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She didn't defend her reaction. She let his patronizing words hang in the air and die between them. "Are you done?" she asked, her voice quiet. Grayson frowned, thrown off by her calm. "What I'm saying is, I'm not here to talk about dinner," Autumn said. She leaned forward, her hands flat on the table. She looked directly into his eyes, the eyes of the man she had loved, the man who had become a complete stranger. She cut through his entire narrative with a single, surgical question. "Who is Rebecca Thornton?" The effect was instantaneous. It was as if someone had pulled a plug in his core. The color drained from his face, leaving a pasty, gray pallor under his expensive tan. The condescending smirk, the confident posture, the irritated power, it all evaporated in a nanosecond. He looked, for the first time in years, completely and utterly terrified. His mouth opened, then closed. A small, choking sound emerged. What? You heard me," Autumn said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the cafe's midday chatter. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, his eyes darting to the barista, then back to her. He was already lying, a reflexive, pathetic attempt. Autumn didn't sigh. She didn't roll her eyes. She simply picked up her phone, turned it over and slid it, screen up, across the table. The screen was bright. On it was the photo. Grayson and Rebecca, on the deck of a yacht, his arm wrapped tightly around her bikini-clad waist, his head tilted toward hers. They were both laughing, basking in the sun, the picture of intimate, careless joy. Grayson stared at the image as if it were a living snake. He couldn't breathe. His gaze snapped up to meet hers, pure, primal panic in his eyes. How did you? The shared cloud, Grayson. Autumn said, her voice a monotone. The one you asked me to manage. The one you trusted me with, to organize your business files. You buried it all in a folder marked personal. Photos.
Hundreds of them.
Screenshots of your texts. Receipts for hotels, for jewelry you didn't give to me. You kept an archive of your betrayal, Grayson. And you asked me to curate it. His face, which had been pale, was now flushing a deep, mottled red. Autumn, listen to me. It's not, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, she interrupted, her voice gaining a hard, sharp edge. I understand it's been 8 months. I understand her name is Rebecca. I understand you've been lying to Connor, too. And I understand why you humiliated me at dinner. What? No, that was a calculated move, she snapped. Connor told me everything. You've been telling your entire professional circle that I'm a dependent. That my business is a hobby. That I'm an embarrassment you have to support. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. You had to humiliate me, Grayson. You had to reinforce your story. Because if I went to the Hamptons, they might have talked to me. They might have realized the woman who paid your rent for 3 years wasn't quite the pathetic, unsophisticated charity case you'd painted her to be. Grayson was dumbfounded. He was visibly shaking, his entire, carefully constructed world collapsing on him in the middle of a coffee shop. He had been outmaneuvered, his lies exposed, his narrative stolen. Autumn, please, he whispered, his eyes pleading. This was a new look. The desperate, cornered animal. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. It was a mistake. I was under so much pressure. No, she said. The word was final. We can't fix this. Because you're not listening. I'm not here to negotiate. I'm not here to save us. I'm here to deliver a message. She picked up her phone, dropping it back into her bag. The apartment, she said. His head snapped up. The lease is in my name. It has always been, only in my name. I spoke to my lawyer this morning. She watched the final bit of comprehension dawn on his face, the realization of his fatal, arrogant mistake. Legally, Grayson, you're a guest in my home. And I am revoking my hospitality. You can't, he breathed, shaking his head in disbelief. You can't just kick me out. That's our home. It was my apartment when you moved in with your 2 broken suitcases, Autumn said, her voice like ice. It is my apartment now. You have until 6 p.m. on Sunday to have all of your things and yourself out of my life. I'll have people there to supervise. She stood up. She placed a $5 bill on the table for the coffee she hadn't touched. Autumn, wait, he hissed, half rising from his chair, his face a mask of panic and rage. You can't do this. You'll destroy everything. Autumn looked down at him, at this powerful, successful man, now reduced to a stammering, pathetic fraud. She felt nothing. No pity, no love, no lingering sadness. Just the cold, clean relief of a long-overdue amputation. You destroyed it, Grayson, she said. I'm just signing the paperwork. She turned, and without looking back, walked out of the Café Renoir, the small bell on the door chiming softly behind her, signaling her exit and his end. Sunday arrived not with a sense of dread, but with a strange, electric calm. Autumn was awake before her alarm, the morning light filtering through the blinds of her bedroom. She packed a small go-bag, her laptop, a book, a change of clothes, as if she were a guest in her own home, which, in a way, she had been. At noon, she walked to a small cafe 6 blocks away, a place Grayson had never liked, deeming it unrefined. She ordered a large coffee and a croissant, sat at a table in the back, and opened her laptop. She did not work. She stared at the blank screen, waiting. At 2 p.m., her phone vibrated. It was Connor. He's here. With movers. He looks rough. Autumn took a slow, deep breath. She had asked Jade, Simone, and Connor to be there, not as muscle, but as witnesses. Jade, with a printed copy of the lease agreement and a sharp, non-negotiable understanding of property law. Simone, to ensure no accidental damage was done to the apartment or its integrated tech. And Connor, she had asked Connor to be the human buffer, a living reminder to Grayson that his lies had infected every corner of his life, even his oldest friendships. Another text, an hour later. This one from Jade. He tried to argue about the black leather sectional, claimed it was a marital asset. I reminded him he was a marital guest, and that anything he couldn't produce a solo receipt for was staying. He's packing his clothes now. Autumn closed her eyes, imagining the scene. Grayson, the master of the boardroom, the king of the Ashford Society, being legally dismantled by her sister in the living room he had stolen. She felt a grim, necessary satisfaction. The afternoon dragged on. She read the same page of her book 4 times. She ordered another coffee. At 4:45 p.m., a text from Connor. He tried to talk to me, asked me how I could betray him. I told him he was the only one who had betrayed anyone. He didn't have an answer. He's moving his personal office items now. At 6:15 p.m., the final message. He's gone. The movers are gone. We did a final sweep. He left a note for you on the kitchen counter. We're heading out. The apartment is yours again. The apartment is yours again. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear. From relief. It was as if a crushing weight she had been carrying for 3 years, a weight she had mistaken for the normal burden of marriage, had just been lifted. She paid her tab and walked slowly back to her building, the cool October air feeling clean and sharp in her lungs. She let herself in. The silence was the first thing she noticed. It was different from the heavy, oppressive silence of the night of the dinner. This was a light, empty, peaceful silence. The apartment was hollowed out. The massive, angular black sectional that had dominated the living room was gone. The cold, sculptural chair he bought was gone. The oversized, abstract painting he had paid thousands for was gone, leaving a large, pale, blank rectangle on the gray wall. His expensive, unused kitchen appliances were gone from the counter. His sound system, too integrated to be removed, remained, a silent monument to his arrogance. The apartment looked sparse, scarred, and twice as big. The evening light, no longer blocked by his heavy, imposing furniture, poured through the windows and reached the far wall for the first time in years. It felt like it could finally breathe. And there, on the white quartz counter, just as Connor had said, was a single piece of paper, torn from one of his expensive notebooks. His handwriting was a rushed, angry scrawl. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an explanation. It was a final, narcissistic arrow. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. He had to frame it as her failure. Her, the one who was lost. Her, the one who was searching. He was incapable, even in his final moment, of acknowledging the truth, that he was the one who had been caught, the one who had lost everything, the one who had been evicted from a life he hadn't even legally secured. Autumn read the note twice. She felt a brief, stinging flash of pity, not for him, but for the man he could have been, the man she had met in Café Renoir. Then, she crumpled the note in her fist. She walked to the trash can, stepped on the pedal, and dropped the small, balled-up piece of his story in with the coffee grounds from that morning. It was exactly where it belonged. She stood in the center of her empty living room. It was an awkward, hybrid space, part her, part the ghost of him. It was a problem to be solved. And as a designer, she knew exactly how to solve it. She went to the deep hall closet, the one he had used for his golf clubs and expensive luggage. In the very back, behind a row of his discarded winter coats, was a tall, cardboard tube. She pulled it out. She spent the next 2 hours reclaiming her space. Using a hammer and nails from the junk drawer he had always criticized, she began to undo his sterile, gray world. She unrolled the first poster, a vibrant, chaotic silkscreen from a concert she'd attended 7 years ago. A band she loved, a band he'd called Noise. She hammered a nail directly into the center of the largest gray wall, his statement wall, and hung it. She hung another in the hallway, where he had insisted on minimalist emptiness. She hung a framed photo of her and Jade, laughing on a beach, a photo he had replaced with a black and white art piece of a bridge. By midnight, the apartment was no longer a showroom. It was a home. Her home. It was messy, it was colorful, it was full of her history. The walls were still his ugly gray, but they were now pockmarked with her rebellion, covered in her joy. She walked into the bedroom. His cologne still lingered, a faint, toxic sweetness. She stripped the expensive, high-thread count sheets he had insisted on, bundled them up, and threw them in the hallway to be donated. She remade the bed with her old, comfortable, slightly faded floral duvet, the one she'd kept in the back of the linen closet. She climbed into bed, surrounded by the familiar scent of her own laundry detergent. She looked at the concert poster she had hung on the opposite wall. And for the first time in more than a year, Autumn Reeves Caldwell fell asleep instantly, deeply, and without a single shred of fear. 2 weeks passed. The apartment, once a hollowed-out, scarred space, was slowly coming back to life. Autumn had spent the weekends in a focused, almost meditative state of reclamation. Armed with spackle, sandpaper, and gallons of warm, cream-colored paint, she was methodically erasing the last physical traces of Grayson's occupancy. She was on a stepladder in the living room, a radio playing a jazz station Grayson had always despised, when her phone rang. She wiped a streak of paint from her cheek with her forearm, her body aching in the satisfying way that only hard, physical labor can produce, and checked the screen. It was Connor. She smiled, expecting another check-in. His calls had become a new, surprising, and welcome routine. He was navigating the awkward space of being Grayson's ex-best friend and her new, unexpected ally. "Hey, Connor," she said, tucking the phone between her ear and shoulder as she dipped her roller back into the paint tray. "If you're calling to tell me he's trying to spin this as a mutual separation, you're too late. His LinkedIn profile is already a masterpiece of corporate self-pity." "Autumn," Connor said, and the tone in his voice made her stop, roller halfway to the wall. It wasn't a check-in. It was a news bulletin. There was a barely suppressed layer of excitement in his voice. "You need to sit down for this. And maybe put the paint roller down." She did both, sliding down the stepladder to sit on the floor, her heart suddenly beating a little faster. "What happened?" "The partner summit," he said. "This past weekend. In the Hamptons." The summit. The event she had been so brutally uninvited from. The place where her humiliation had been solidified. "Okay." It was apparently spectacular," Connor said, and she could hear him grinning. Rebecca Thornton was there, of course. The entire firm was. And apparently, at some point during the cocktail reception on Friday, one of the partners, I think it was Devin Whitaker, made an offhand comment to Rebecca. "About what?" "About her boss," Connor said, his voice dropping dramatically. "He apparently said something like, 'Tough break for Grayson, huh?' First his new partnership, and then his wife finally kicks him out. He used those exact words, Autumn. His wife." Autumn felt a cold jolt. "Oh no." "Oh yes," Connor shot back. "Autumn." Rebecca didn't know. "What do you mean she didn't know?" "She was having an affair with a married man." "No," Connor said, his voice sharp with the impact of the revelation. "That's the entire point. She wasn't. She was having an affair with her single, successful, unattached boss. Grayson told her you weren't his wife. He told her you were his executive assistant." Autumn's head spun. The paint fumes, the shock. Executive assistant? After the text had called her a roommate, she hadn't thought the demotion could get any worse. He hadn't just lied to his mistress about his wife. He had erased his wife entirely. He had constructed 2 completely separate, elaborate, fictional lives. One for his colleagues, where she was his pathetic, dependent wife, and one for his mistress, where she was his paid staff. It was the work of a complete sociopath. What did she do?" Autumn whispered, her back against the half-painted wall. "From what I heard," Connor said, and his voice was full of the delicious, righteous schadenfreude of the moment, she didn't believe Devin. She thought he was confused. So she went and asked Victoria. And Victoria, God bless her, confirmed it. "Oh, yes. Autumn's his wife. Such a tragedy." He paused, letting the scene build. The main reception was Saturday night, Autumn. The big one. All the partners, all the investors, all the spouses. The entire crowd from the Ashford Society was there, all in one room. Autumn closed her eyes, picturing it. The room full of tuxedos and jewels, the same people who had watched her in pity and embarrassment. Rebecca, Connor continued, walked straight up to Grayson, who was holding court by the champagne fountain. And in front of everyone, Autumn, she confronted him. She didn't whisper. She didn't make a scene, not really. She was cold. Professional. She just asked him, "Why did you tell me your wife was your executive assistant?" The silence on the other end of the phone was more vivid than any sound. Grayson apparently froze. Tried to laugh it off, tried to pull her aside. But she didn't move. She stood there and, in this clear, carrying voice, just dismantled him. She called him a liar, a fraud. She told him, and by extension, everyone in that room, that he had deliberately deceived her for 8 months, that he had lied about every single aspect of his personal life. And then, Connor said, she delivered the kill shot. She announced, "I am filing a formal complaint with the firm's ethics committee for professional misconduct." Then she turned around and walked right out of the reception, leaving him standing there alone, completely exposed. Autumn was speechless. The poetic justice of it was staggering. He had used a public forum to humiliate her, to secure his false narrative. And now, that same public, that same forum, had been used to obliterate him, broadcast his real, pathetic truth. She finally found her voice, but the question that came out surprised even her. "Is she okay? Rebecca, I mean." Connor was quiet for a beat. "That is an incredibly generous question, Autumn. I have no idea, but I doubt it." "She's not the villain here, Connor," Autumn said quietly, looking at the wall she was painting, a literal blank canvas. "She was lied to, just like I was. He built a completely fictional reality for both of us, and just kept us in separate boxes, so we'd never find out. She's a victim in this, too." "Maybe," Connor said, "but she just ended his career. That complaint an internal ethics investigation? For a partner? That's not something you just sweep under the rug. He's not going to survive this." Autumn hung up the phone a few minutes later and stood. She looked at the half-painted wall. One side was the cold, sterile gray of Grayson's world. The other was the warm, bright cream of hers. It was a perfect visual metaphor. The unraveling of Grayson Caldwell had begun. And the most beautiful part, the part that made her take a deep, clean breath of the paint-filled air, was that she hadn't had to do a single thing. She had just stepped out of the way and let his own lies, his own arrogance, finally crash into each other. The cream-colored paint was dry, and the apartment was, for the first time in years, completely hers. The scent of Grayson's cologne had been replaced by the smell of latex paint and old books. Autumn was back at her desk, her original, worn, wooden desk, which she'd retrieved from storage, and immersed in a branding project for a new client, a women's community tech initiative. She was sketching logo concepts, lost in the familiar, satisfying flow of creative work, when her phone buzzed. It was Connor, his name now a familiar, friendly presence. "I'm interrupting work, aren't I?" he said, his voice cheerful. "You are," Autumn said, smiling as she capped her pen. "And I've never been happier to be working. What's the latest bulletin from the front lines?" "Well," he said, "the bomb that Rebecca detonated in the Hamptons? It had a secondary blast radius." Autumn settled back in her chair. "Go on." She filed the complaint. "First thing Monday morning," Connor reported. "Formal. Detailed. It went straight to the partners and HR. They had no choice but to launch a full, formal internal investigation into Grayson's professional conduct. An ethics investigation," Autumn mused, thinking of the man who had none.
Exactly.
"And you know what happens when a firm like that starts digging, Autumn? They don't just look for what they're told to look for. They look for everything." He was right. A corporation, when threatened with a lawsuit or an ethics scandal, becomes a cold, calculating, self-preservation machine. "They started with the expense reports," Connor continued, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "All those business trips. All those client dinners. All those conference fees." Autumn's mind flashed to the folder on Simone's drive. The hotel receipts. The jewelry. The flowers. He wasn't just having an affair, Autumn. He was funding it with company money, Connor said, confirming her suspicion. He was falsifying expense reports. Hotel rooms in Miami, dinners in the Hamptons, bottles of champagne. All of it was being charged to business development or client entertainment accounts. He was stealing. The word hung in the air. Stealing. It wasn't a surprise. It was a pattern. The man who had emotionally and financially leached off her, who had stolen her identity to build his own narrative, had, of course, been stealing from his partners as well. "Marcus is incandescent," Connor said. "Not because of the affair. He doesn't care about the morality. He's furious because Grayson's stupidity exposed the firm. Falsifying reports? Misusing client funds? That's not just an ethics breach. That's a legal breach. That's lose your license territory." "And the clients?" Autumn asked, already knowing the answer. "Word got out.
Fast.
Reputation is the only currency in that world, and Grayson's just went bankrupt. Two of his biggest clients have already formally requested new account handlers. No one wants to be associated with him. He's radioactive. Autumn thought of all those nights she had stayed up, helping him refine pitch decks, all the financial strain she had absorbed, so he could build that very reputation. And he had set it on fire. All for an affair he was too arrogant to even hide properly. A week later, Connor called again. She was in her kitchen, making dinner, listening to her music loud. "It's done," he said. No preamble. "What's done?" "The investigation. The partnership. It's all done." They terminated his partnership agreement, effective immediately. The official statement cited gross violations of company policy and a fundamental breach of professional ethics standards.
He's out, Autumn.
Fired.
Disgraced.
Autumn leaned against her counter. She waited for a feeling, a surge of triumph, a spike of vengeful joy, a sense of righteous victory. Nothing came. She just felt quiet. The news landed not like a bomb, but like the final, soft click of a lock falling into place. It was over. The story was finished. "You should see his LinkedIn profile," Connor said, a note of dark amusement in his voice. He just posted an update. Something about embracing new opportunities and the importance of resilience in the face of profound change. He's spinning his public execution as a sabbatical. Autumn actually laughed. A real, genuine laugh. Of course he is. He'll never ever own it. Probably not, Connor agreed. But it doesn't matter. Everyone in the industry knows the truth. He's finished in this city. Later that night, out of a final, lingering curiosity, she pulled up Grayson's profile. There it was, just as Connor described. A professionally worded post about exciting new chapters and learning from challenges. The comments were sparse, careful, neutral phrases from colleagues. "All the best, Grayson. Wishing you well on your next endeavor." It was the corporate equivalent of a funeral. She looked at his smiling, professional headshot, the one she had taken for him in her apartment. She looked at his lies, and she felt the last, lingering tendril of his influence break. He was just a man on a screen. A story she had already finished reading. She closed the browser, and in doing so, she closed the final chapter of her life with him. She had a client presentation to finish. She had her own career to build, the one that had never been a hobby. She had her own life to live, and he had no part in it. The unraveling of Grayson Caldwell was complete, and Autumn hadn't had to lift a finger. She had just had to get out of his way. 4 months after the eviction, the apartment was unrecognizable. The last of the sterile gray paint had been vanquished, meticulously covered by coats of warm, inviting cream. The pale, blank rectangle where Grayson's abstract art had hung was now the proud home of Autumn's own painting, a vibrant, chaotic canvas of color and movement that she had kept hidden in storage for 2 years after he'd dismissed it as too personal. She had found her reading chair, or rather, a reading chair, at an estate sale in the village. It was overstuffed, covered in a soft, worn floral fabric, and was, by all of Grayson's standards, completely unsophisticated. It was the most comfortable thing she had ever owned. Her books were finally organized by author, not by the color of their spines. "It finally smells like you in here again," her friend Maya said, flopped on Autumn's new sofa, a comfortable, deep-seated piece she'd bought secondhand. Less anxious millionaire, more human being. Autumn laughed, handing her a mug of coffee. Her friendships, which had been neglected under the oppressive weight of Grayson's social ambitions, were blooming again. Her life, once cramped and cold, now felt spacious. It was Maya who had quite literally dragged her back into the professional world. "You are going to the Brooklyn Design Conference," Maya had announced a month prior, waving a registration email. "You can't hide in your beautifully repainted apartment forever. You're a brilliant designer, Autumn. It's time to go be brilliant in public." The thought had filled her with a cold, residual dread. The Ashford Society. The pitying stares. The whispers. But Maya was right. She couldn't let Grayson's ghost keep her from her own life. So she went. She was on a panel, Branding with Purpose, discussing her work with nonprofits. She spoke about authenticity, about using design to communicate a mission, not just to sell a product. She was passionate, energized, and felt a spark she hadn't realized she'd lost. After the panel, as she was gathering her laptop and notes, a man approached the dais. He was perhaps a few years older than her, with an easy smile and warm, intelligent eyes. He was dressed professionally, but in a way that prioritized comfort over pretense. "Your perspective on purpose-driven design was refreshing," he said, extending a hand. "Most of the panels today are about maximizing profit. You were talking about maximizing impact." Julian Carter. "I'm an architect." They started talking, standing by the stage as the room emptied out. And somehow, 3 hours passed. He wasn't a venture capitalist or an investor. He designed community centers and affordable, sustainable housing projects. He didn't talk about his wins or the deals he had closed. He talked about the problems he was trying to solve, how to create public spaces that felt welcoming, how to build dignity into low-income housing. He asked her questions about her work, and he listened, really listened, to her answers, his head tilted with genuine curiosity. When the conference staff finally began dimming the lights, he blinked, as if waking up.
Wow. Okay.
"Well, I don't want to keep you, but would you be interested in continuing this conversation over coffee sometime? When we're not being kicked out?" Autumn felt a familiar, protective knot tighten in her stomach. The part of her that had been wounded by Grayson, the part that had been trained to see all interactions as transactions, whispered that this was a risk. But the new, stronger part of her, the part that had reclaimed her home, spoke first. "I'd like that," she said, her voice steady. "But I should be upfront. I just got out of a very difficult, very sudden divorce. I'm not really looking for anything complicated right now." Julian's smile didn't waver. It wasn't predatory or eager or calculating. It was just kind. "Coffee isn't complicated," he said gently. "It's just coffee. No expectations. Just two people talking."
And it was.
Coffee at a small, sunlit cafe in Park Slope became dinner 2 weeks later. Dinner became long, rambling walks through Brooklyn neighborhoods, where Julian would point out the architectural details on old brownstones, explaining the history and purpose behind a design choice. He didn't try to impress her. He just shared things he found interesting. He was the first man in years who didn't make her feel like she was in a competition. He made her feel like a person. She was at that same cafe with him 2 months later, sketching a logo idea on a napkin while they waited for their food, when her phone buzzed. It was a message from Connor, with a screenshot attached. "You have to see this," the message read. It was Grayson's latest LinkedIn post. It was a long, masterfully crafted, self-pitying essay. It was a symphony of corporate buzzwords, speaking vaguely of profound personal and professional challenges, and the difficult but necessary process of reevaluating. He wrote about embracing a new chapter and learning resilience in the face of sudden change. He was, just as Connor had predicted, spinning his career-ending, ethics-violating disgrace as an intentional, spiritual journey of personal growth. A year ago, this post would have sent her into a spiral of rage. 6 months ago, it would have filled her with a bitter, righteous triumph. Autumn read the entire, self-aggrandizing post, word by word. Then she looked up at Julian, who was telling a funny story about a contractor. She looked at his kind eyes. She looked at her own hand, relaxed on the table. And she felt nothing. Not anger. Not pity. Not even curiosity. He was just a man on a screen, writing stories. He was a ghost. He had no power. He had become, finally and completely, irrelevant. She handed the phone to Julian, a small, wry smile on her face. "You're good with translations. What do you make of this?" He read the post, his brow furrowed, and then a slow smile spread across his face. He handed the phone back. "Translation," he said. "I think it means, I destroyed my marriage and my career through spectacular arrogance and dishonesty, and now I am attempting to rebrand my consequences as intentional evolution." Autumn laughed. A real, genuine, unrestrained laugh that made the people at the next table look over and smile. She realized her victory had never been about destroying Grayson. He had been the architect of his own ruin.
Her victory was this.
Sitting in a sunlit cafe, with a good man, in a life she was building on her own, truthful terms. She slipped her phone back into her bag, silencing it. She picked up her pen, turned the napkin over, and, for the first time in a long time, started to design her future.